Good evening, welcome to MOTS presents MOTS Ado About Nothing.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
Where we apply the revolutionary MOTS scale to classic and contemporary literature.
MOTS Ado About Nothing. MOTS Ado About Nothing.
This podcast contains mature content, spoilers, language. You have been warned.
Hello, and welcome to MOTS Ado About Nothing. My name is Chris Morgan. I'm here with Scott Thurlow.
Hello there.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Here to be your ambassador to linguistics.
And Stephen Ormosi.
Howdy.
And today we are doing Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang. And this story was the basis of last year's movie Arrival. And I purposely did not see Arrival because I read the story and I knew I was going to be hosting this for MOTS. And I wanted to keep us on track for the story. And I don't like spoilers to the movies. So we're staying...
A hero to us all, Chris.
That's quite a bit of forethought.
Yeah.
I am. Well, I've actually been giving this a lot of thought. So this could be a grave disappointment of a podcast. Why? Because I really like... Well, we're going to discuss that.
Don't start off with that.
So does anybody want to give us a log line for this story?
Not really, but I do want to say check out our review of Arrival, which we actually did for the movie.
Yes, we did do that.
When it did come out. Now, I don't have a log line per se, and I don't know if anyone else does, but I'll just tell you about the intro. You know, I'll give the synopsis when it comes to it soon enough.
Go ahead.
I don't have a funny log line, so sorry. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, guys. Sorry, everyone.
Disappointed.
Hey, I don't know what to tell you. But if it is to me for intro body conclusion.
It is to you for intro body conclusion.
So the best way I can sort of nutshell it is that aliens show up on Earth in a number of ships around the world. Humans have tried to establish a communication line, learn their language, learn how it works, and they eventually do. And the story is focused on a linguistical doctor. I don't even know her name. I don't remember anymore. Tell me later. She figures it out, and in doing so, she sort of learns a new way of thinking. Her worldview changes because of the nature of their language that she discovers and teases out throughout, and it ties back into other personal matters related to her. And then the aliens leave, and the story ends. That's pretty much it. Anyone, did I forget anything here?
No, you didn't. Well, there is I suppose, a subplot, or perhaps an A-plot, depending on how you wish for this, involving... After she all along had the ability to, like, when she learned the alien language, her mindset changed from being a kind of causal, linear relationship that most humans, or all humans, look at, to the idea of being able to see past, present, and future all at the same time, but not being able to, in a sense, change it. Everything, in a sense, becomes determinate in life. Now, what's odd to me about this is I saw the movie first. And I came in with the foreknowledge, because it actually holds very close to the movie. It holds
Some
very
parts.
close to the story. Yeah, there's slight changes, but for the most part, it's handles everything. Now, that said, I can't assess this neutrally. Like, I knew everything going in. In a sense, very much like the main character, I knew the beginning, middle, and end.
He
all
saw
along.
all the outcomes. Yes.
So, but I enjoyed the ride throughout. Now, it's interesting to me to find out who among us enjoy the ride or not, because it's a very academic look at the situation. It's not necessarily narratively engaging, because it's mostly a scientist. How a scientist would look at an alien presence versus necessarily an action-oriented thing. And I enjoyed that because I kind of, having studied linguistics, I could appreciate the methodology she went about studying the alien. But in a sense, I feel that might be a pet kind of enjoyment that I have. I don't know how that would translate to people who don't particularly enjoy linguistics.
So, yeah, you used the word narrative engagement, which I think I'm going to start using henceforth. And as applied to this particular story, I don't know if that was enough. And you're right, like, because we've seen Arrival, the movie itself, I'm going to try the best I can to ignore the fact that it exists, that I saw it first, and try to approach the story in a vacuum. But there are certainly points, perhaps, in which we just can't do that. And especially, as you said, being a student of the very subject that this focuses on, that might also color your opinion. But if I'm going to give you my initial impressions and possible initial score, I'm going to go probably with a 2. I'll give the intro a 1. I think it was pretty arresting. It's a good setup, and it was well portrayed. And the body itself was also interesting. I think I might take points off the conclusion, and perhaps I'll tell you why. I'll flesh it out more, but I thought it was just a little lackluster, I guess I'll say. I liked the ride, but I didn't like where the ride ended me up at, I guess. Where the ride, like,
I don't think anyone particularly enjoys the end of their ride.
I guess not, but I didn't enjoy the ride of reading this story when I got to the end. But I did enjoy it well enough throughout, specifically intro body, so I'm going to give it a 2 outright, and I will open it up to the floor to you, gentlemen.
I think I'm probably going to be on your side in this, Scott. I like the story overall. I thought that it was very interesting talking about the scientific side of what's going on linguistically with these aliens, and you don't really get much of the physics side throughout the story, but you get a little bit of it, and that's kind of interesting as well. I think that where this falls short a little bit is that it is a bit saccharine in terms of the story with the daughter.
I absolutely agree, and I love that word.
I think that
is accurate.
It kind of makes that a very, very important part, and that's the emotional touchstone of this story.
Yeah.
Whereas the interactions with the aliens and with other doctors and physicists and things are where the plot actually comes from. The emotional touchdown is the story of the daughter, and it comes in like herks and jerks throughout the story, and it's
disjointed a bit.
It's definitely definitely emotionally, as it's designed to be, emotionally fraught with these moments that are touching, I guess, but they don't.
Supposed to be, at least.
To me, they don't really mean much in terms of what the story is. Other than they're a touchdown to make this person who has kind of risen above humanity, right, in the way that they see the world, have a human touchdown.
Well, what's interesting to me was that, oddly enough, not deciphering a alien language nor developing a new state of consciousness, but the most important event in her life was the birth and death of her daughter, which, granted, so I want to compare this to another author quickly, Michael Crichton, who deals often with scientific
similar things. Yeah.
So, but what he does well is that he develops, in a sense, audience surrogates. People who, like, he'll have like the Ian Malcolms in Jurassic Park who are dealing with chaos theory and aspects like that. But then you'll have other characters that, as an audience, you can attach yourself to. In this thing, you have basically two major one major character and one secondary, when the linguist and the physicist and their interactions. And like, I was drawn in, and I'm going to give this a 3 because I had my audience surrogate in the main linguist there. But I think that if you don't come from necessarily a linguistic background, aside from the attempt to make her a motherly figure, I don't think that there's anything to really attach yourself to in this story as someone, like, you're kind of watching someone
as a layman,
layman, who's interested in something you're not interested in, discuss a topic.
That thing. Yeah. No, I mean, you're right about that. You guys are both right. I don't really have much more to add. You said it pretty well together. That's my reason for giving it a 2. So, what do you think, Chris?
It was really interesting when I first read this. I hadn't seen Arrival, still haven't. But I had seen the trailers, and I purposely, the reason this is pertinent is because as I'm reading it, and I've read a lot of Arthur C. Clarke and, seen a lot of Twilight Zone. So I'm sitting there, I'm following the story, I'm following the linguistics, but I want to know, like, I'm kind of more like the military plays the part of wanting to know the end game of what these aliens are. And I found myself that as a reader, and I got to the end, and it all kind of came together for me, the whole story, which is why I suggested it, which is why we read it. Because the whole perception of time and how we got there. So it was really funny for me that I found after reading it that everything that I was judging the story on while I was reading it was actually like an incomplete picture. It's kind of one of these things where I had to take myself out of the time. You can't read this. I found myself frustrated because I wanted to know what the end game was. But once I realized what the story was, what it was, I kind of had to take myself out of time. So it was after I was starting to
took himself out of time, folks.
I had to take myself out of time, essentially knowing the beginning, middle, and end of the story and the purpose of it. And it wasn't until I was talking to my wife, Beth, about this that I really became enamored with it. And a lot of it was visceral, and a lot of it was, upon my second reading, I was deconstructing it more. And we're going to get to that when we get to themes and style. But I'm going to give it a 3 for the same reason. And it was, if you had asked me while I was reading it, I'd be like, the story's driving me off a fucking wall. But after I read it, it seemed to come together in a way that I didn't notice while it was going on. And, so I'm giving it a 3, and I really wanted to hear what all 3 of you had to say, because it was just interesting how we all perceived in a story like this, getting your perceptions of it was I found really interesting. So you're all my little lab rats, so.
Way to be.
Nailed it.
I have more to say, but I think it's more pertinent to style, so I'll wait about that.
Yeah,
But-
that's kind of how I feel.
So I'll give it a 2, though. Final score.
Yep.
For intro, about a conclusion.
And Ian, we have you with themes.
I found this fascinating because I'm not a phonologist or a phoneticist, I
Not yet.
suppose. I'm more, when I say linguist, was drawn to semantics and pragmatics and that side of. So I'm not interested in how, like, I learned how tribes, like people went and studied tribes and things like that. That was never my really great interest in it. So it was interesting because I was reading it. I'm like, I know that word. I know that word. You're using that word correctly. But the thing is, I'm curious to see what a person who really does study, like, in a sense, alien languages in the sense of meeting a tribe that you have to basically find a way to have a conversation with to learn their language, would feel about her methodology in linguistics.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
And so it was enough that I knew they knew what they were talking about, but I not necessarily know how applicable it would be to that situation.
Exactly.
Could be a Dan Brown situation.
That's pretty well said.
Why did you bring him up?
Yeah. No,
Because it's
he has a
pertinent, yeah.
gloss. He has a cover idea of what's going on usually, but it's usually bullshit.
Well,
That he writes
It's
his
all
whole
surface
stuff,
shit.
you know.
It's-
which it may not be that.
It's
but-
not that bad. It's
Or it may not be bad at all.
They have
we just don't know.
very good knowledge. It's just that I'm like really curious. I want to like ask professors about what their opinion of this work is. That said, like I know a little bit about physics as well, and I appreciated the melding of like physics inspiring linguistics.
Or like was sort of like the analogy that bridged the two kind of.
Yeah.
I did like that. Yeah, go on.
And going into also, I studied philosophy, doing like the metaphysics and the consciousness, and how I've heard the concept prior to having seen Arrival that learning a language can actually shape your cognitive abilities. And I've also heard like Kurt Vonnegut back also wrote like Trafalgadorians or whatever, who also
Malfadorians,
yeah, whatever
they
they
are.
were.
Yes.
Seeing in the time
Dimension.
seeing the entire time dimension, and it's believable. Even if it is kind of speculative science, it still has what I recognize as solid foundation, and so for that I have to give it a 1. It's because it's speculative fiction about something linguistics, which I'm interested in.
Well, to build on your point, and Beth and I were discussing this last night about language and perception, she was talking about, like, in terms of color. Like, there's areas of the color spectrum that we don't see as well because of the way our language is how we perceive things based on our language, whereas, like, Cyrillic languages like Russian or so forth, they can more easily see those colors of the spectrum, and I'm not getting into detail, Beth, because I will probably get it wrong. But it is interesting. We were just talking about how language does affect your physical perception in a lot of ways.
Well, to build
it can.
The color blue is is a very famous example of like the fact that word doesn't exist in certain languages, and there's an argument that I believe that until you learn the word, and as you can't actually particularly see the color, or you perceive it differently than you do. Yeah. So there's a lot of that kind of, and I'm glad this brings it up. Unfortunately, I don't know how interesting it is to people who aren't already
as immersed in it.
Well, I think that as you guys said, there are those things where it's like the color blue is that really good example that a lot more people know than anything else. Where the most like literary example of that was, I think, Homer called the sea the wine dark sea, because they didn't really have a word for blue, and the idea, and this kind of goes into themes, I think, as well. The idea is, do we come up with the word because we see the color, or do we come up with, or do we see the color because we see the word? And I think they play hand in hand with each other. Some scientist was talking about this. I was listening to, I don't know, Radio Lab or something.
I think I heard the same one.
And basically, they were saying that because the color blue doesn't actually occur in nature very much outside of... So, here's the one that everybody goes to right away, is like the sky and water, I guess, to an extent. Although a lot of water isn't blue, but the sky is like a basic one that everybody says. But yeah, if you look at flowers aren't naturally blue almost ever. Animals aren't naturally blue almost ever. All kinds of stuff like that. There's like a few beetles that are blue, I guess, but like not much in nature that comes out of that is the color blue. Discovered. And I think that's a really interesting thing in terms of themes. And it's not exactly the theme of this, I don't think, but it's something
it touches upon.
It's something that builds out of this, right? The entire idea of this is that, and I guess I'm going to switch gears now to the idea of the circular nature of time and being able to explain things as though they're all happening at the same time versus seeing them happening
one
thing after another is a really cool concept. And I really like how it's done in this story. I almost wish that this was long, like a book, so that it could be explored more. And I wish that in that book they would kind of cut out the daughter parts and just talk about the linguistic parts. But I get why it's there. It's there to be a humanizing. Yeah, it's there to be a humanizing section of this story. But regardless, I liked where this book went in terms of like talking about linguistics.
You mean the story?
I'm sorry. Where this short story went.
That you so desperately want to be a book.
I bought the book. It's only a small part of the book, but I like where it went in terms of talking about linguistics and time and kind of how we view both in terms of one another.
There's also one part I really did enjoy with the idea is that, because there's often the thing, if you can see past, present, future, why don't you, like the argument of free will, why don't you change things? And how
that's right.
It comes naturally that she, the character, after she develops the ability, was like, oh, of course I don't. It's the way things are. Like, I can't, and the fact that it becomes such because there's an argument that free will, while not necessarily an illusion, is simply a product of our linear.
We'll say an emergent property, perhaps.
Yeah, that's perfect. And the idea is that if you can see both past and future, all of a sudden that what allows it to become an emergent property is gone, and you're stuck with, in a sense, maybe not even. I don't think someone with that would say it's determinism. They would just say that it's the natural course of the world and a feature of time.
But isn't that another way to say it's determinism?
Yeah, but you saying that is your bias towards free will. I don't think that they would.
I'm not biased towards free will. I think that the world is deterministic. To be honest,
free will can suck it.
But I think that it wouldn't even be a consideration of free will versus determinism. It would be a consideration of just the natural way.
This is the way it is. Which I mean, all right. Well, that's a whole.
I do want to. Well, we'll discuss free will versus determinism in some other podcast. But I do want to address the themes, as you guys just mentioned, touch upon various things that I largely agree with. That they're all there, and I think they were pretty well handled. But as you said, like, I think there's a line, if not this outright, something close, where once, I think it's Dr. Louise Banks, and that just came to me
Louise Banks,
as the main character. Once she starts learning the hepatids language and, like, sort of getting into the mindset of it, yeah, she starts being able to see, like, past and present and future are, like, sort of blurred. Mm. But when she brings up, like, the exact problem of free will, that it's almost as if she's urged to enact the things she's knowing are going to happen.
Right.
So it's sort of like a weird, like, opposite effect. Like, oh, why couldn't I change it? Like, she feels like an opposite, like the opposite of being compelled to change it, almost compelled to enact it the way she saw it, even if it's in the future. Which I thought was a pretty little neat idea, at least a sort of different angle to applied to the free will problem. But I think everything else you guys just said, like, yes, certainly, I think you'll probably get more out of it if you're a reader who is interested or has delved more into linguistical studies and so forth, or just has a natural inclination towards them. But I still think it was very well handled, and because it touched upon those number of things that we just said, and what I felt to be a pretty well done, solid way, I'm going to give Themes a solid 1 overall.
Yeah, I'm giving Themes a very solid 1 as well. I really like the discussion of free will versus determinism.
I mean, I always will.
In terms of this,
we should do that for neophytes because I'm like sitting here going, I had a point to make about color because I was thinking indigo and how many different ways
the nature of red.
And how many different ways that the oceans talked about, like whether it's the Green Atlantic Ocean and how we always discuss it, like the blue waters of blah blah blah. It's just that itself could be a whole discussion. I found that really interesting, and the only point
we'll definitely cover it.
We're gonna cover it because I was enjoying listening to you guys talk, because with me, what tied the story together was the perception of time. Well, no, because
definitely tied that story together, man.
Well, the thing is, I'm trying to keep, because there's like 15 different things I could say about everything you said. I'm trying to keep this on a focus. And the first thing, right, the reason I chose this story is because I knew that Scott and my wife are like amateur physicists, and
I think I'm level
Ian's
below
definitely
amateur.
linguistic, and I knew that just given our dynamics as a group, that everybody was going to add something to this. So I'm definitely, I was really interested in hearing what you guys had to say, less than what I had to say. But as a Trekkie,
trust me too.
Fuck
Just kidding. Ouch. Go on.
Rude.
As a Trekkie, my favorite show of the new series is Deep Space Nine. In the pilot of it, the protagonist meets these aliens that live out of linear time, and the whole concept of the fact that you're in the present, but a visceral memory that we're never really truly living in the present. Something is going to bring us back to a certain point. We're going to feel that. Like, what's her name's accident in Better Call Saul. I've seen a lot of car accidents on TV, but the way
a lot of nebulous examples, man.
No, but what I'm saying is that instant when I saw that accident portrayed, I flashed back to a car accident that I had. And I just find this whole concept of, and a lot of this is going to go to style, so I'll save what fascinated when on my second read. But the whole concept of the fact that we never really truly live in a linear existence in several different ways. Just when I got to the end of it, to have that tie it in, I found just changed the whole story for me. Like I said, I'm definitely giving Themes a 1. You guys, as I expected, brought out things that I hadn't considered while I was reading this. So yeah, it's getting a very strong 1 for me. But I just wanted to make the one point instead of divulging into everything you guys said, because I loved everything you guys said.
Time is fucked up, and what is time anyways?
Chris, I also respect that you don't live in a linear timeline. Either, so.
Clearly not.
From Free Will to Deep Space Nine to Better Call Saul.
He did say earlier he broke himself out of time or whatever he said, so.
I totally did.
That'd be awesome if I could do that myself.
But
I guess we're giving it a 1.
Is that ones everywhere?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is very meta,
For sure.
Steve-O. Antagonist.
Brutal one for me.
Hmm.
I don't even know if there's anything even close to an antagonist in this. Not even.
Don't say time.
Time is a protagonist.
Do not do
anything.
it. Yeah, exactly. I was going to make that argument. That's amazing.
There's nothing antagonizing anyone. Death. I guess.
I think you, Eddie. I have
Perhaps
one.
Death.
I have one for you.
Is the antagonist?
I don't have. I absolutely agree with you because I had said I'm not going to compare it to the movie too much, but I'm going to have to in the sense that the movie had to insert antagonists that didn't exist in the story.
Yep.
And that's my whole point.
But that's why I was actually frustrated with the while I was reading the first time, is because I had seen the trailers. I'm like, I knew there was all this fakakta nonsense going on outside what was going on. So I wanted to know what the hell was going on.
There was one fakakta nonsense, we'll say, in the film. But again, there's, as we said, we're trying to, not compare it, not to the 1-to-1 ratio. So I agree with you, Steve, of course, in this instance, there's not much there. I guess, I was going to make a very flimsy case for, encountering a different culture, etc. species.
It's a triumph at the end.
It's not really, because the aliens themselves are not antagonists, really. They're trying to communicate the best they can, and they're learning the language. So yeah, it's sort of like we find ourselves in this position, giving it a default 0 through no fault of the story whatsoever.
Absolutely.
Just that it isn't there. It's not part of it.
Tends to happen fairly often on short stories, I've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, here and there, depending on the nature of it.
They can function without an antagonist.
Exactly. The nature of the story, the fact that what we're dealing with, in terms of time, does seem to negate the antagonist. Because I always said that sometimes it doesn't need to be an antagonist so much as a catalyst. And because of the nature of the story,
fakakta nonsense.
The fakakta nonsense.
Uh-huh.
But because of the nature of the way,
nature of the story.
Yeah. So I think you said it best. By default, there is no antagonist.
So I have one more point that I'd like to make on the topic, is that this is an application of philosophical theory on a character to see what would happen if a character went through the process of changing mind, which does not necessitate an antagonist there, as you guys pointed out. So, yeah, I have to give it a 0, but not because
it was bad or poorly handled or anything.
Maybe Free Will is the antagonist.
I would say time, of course. I mean, that's what I've said facetiously.
Time has come today.
Yes.
If there's going to be some abstract antagonist, one of us would have picked it up. So,
but not even in this case can I say that. So.
Okay, so it's on to me with Protagonist, and the protagonist is Louise Banks.
Dr. Louise Banks.
Sorry, doctor.
She didn't go to 8 years of medical school to be called Louise Banks.
Well, she definitely go to 8 years medical school, but she's a doctor.
She's a doctor. Dr. Louise Banks. And considering the story is in first person, I think by default I have to give her a 1. But
why?
Well, that's not true.
Because it's in first person.
But no, well, I mean, it's funny because I'm trying to figure out if she's an active or more of a reactive protagonist, because it's just what makes her.
She's everything in one.
It's kind of hard to, as with the story, it's kind of hard to discuss this without actually bringing in supporting characters and style into it. But I mean, as a protagonist, we're seeing everything unfold through her eyes. The perception of the story is definitely because of her. Her daughter, I figure out and we're going to get to this in supporting, but is the nexus for her. I mean,
okay. Yeah.
And, I think she's a very effective protagonist, even if she's more, in a lot of ways, reactive when she's with the heptapods. It's really hard to discuss. Go on.
I'm going to try to build off that because I'm somewhat torn on this one myself. And it goes back to something Ian brought up, and possibly all of us, but it's because if you're into like what her field is, then you'll probably like her as a protagonist. Yes, of course, it's in first person, which by default makes her the protagonist. But is she effective? Did I connect with her? Somewhat, because I am interested in this field to an extent. Yes. But I could see what you mean. Like the reactionary point is the thing that's sort of tripping me up. And maybe it's because the daughter thing is the nexus. So like it has to, the story's framework and style, as we'll speak about, flashes back, or at least cuts between both of those. So I guess it cuts up like how much attachment, how much investment you can put into this character, given the way she's written. And she's not written poorly or badly or anything like that. It's just that I don't know if there's enough. Like, it's really 50-50, so I'm pretty torn. You guys can try to convince me.
All right. Looking at her work as a linguist, again, I had mentioned earlier that I'm not 100% sure that her methodology is sound. I'm not necessarily questioning it. It's just that it's like I understand what she's saying. It seems to me that what she does is she seems competent to me.
Yes.
And yes, she has she makes a few breakthroughs reactionary, through reaction, through other people telling her things that spark a light bulb in her head. And then there's a point when it transitions from her coming up with unique ideas on her own to her now being aware of the nature of time, and now she's waiting. Basically, it's in a way, it's like she's an NPC in a video game, waiting for the proper
trigger or whatever,
triggers from other characters. She already knows what people are going to say. Now she's going through the motion. But I feel that in a way, even at that point, she doesn't lose her agency because she understands.
She sort of embraces the nature of it.
Yeah, her new role with having a kind of prescience, if you will.
Yeah.
But I always felt that before that point, when she's coming up with her own thing, that she's a very competent linguist.
I agree.
And I have to give her credit for that. And that's my bias coming from that background, but still.
But I mean, but like actually, they did make a point that the linguistics were making ground before the physicists. But she was the one who actually was the first one to figure out that how came with theories like how their language may have worked about I'm going to screw it up. The logograms?
Logograms, yeah.
I mean, that was kind of like what her groundwork did, even if it was just the very tip of the iceberg, really kind of set the ball rolling.
Yeah. Yeah, but to me, that makes her a proactive character. Yeah. Right? It's like, in a lot of the ways, she is the one that figures out all this stuff that's happening. And yes, perhaps it is part of this grander script that the heptapods knew before. She figured out that was the case, and part of the grander script that she knew eventually.
I like how you can get double use of a grander script in this.
She figured it out, right? But it's not. I think that she's a strong character, even in the description of her understanding of what's going on. I thought that made her a strong character, even in her. So like, there's this weird thing for me, right? Because in order to talk about the free will argument, you have to give your story some level of free will in that she can think about whatever she wants to, but she can't just do something else. Whereas, I mean, I guess her knowing everything dictates that she has to be thinking about this as well, right? But it kind of seems like in this story, it kind of seems like there's free will in what you can do and say out loud, and then, there's no free will in what you can do and say out loud towards the end, but she can still think about how it works as much as she wants.
To an extent, yeah.
And I guess that doesn't necessarily say that she has free will to think about that, because, clearly she could be thinking about a million other things, but she's not. She's thinking about that. And that's the way that kind of this story goes, right? You can go way deep into the rabbit hole and stuff like that.
Mm. What fascinates me about this work is that you're actually seeing two versions of her for the first half of the story. You're seeing the version that can look back upon her memories and forward. And she's assessing a situation at one level section,
we'll say,
as the kind of all-knowing, and then you're seeing her before she actually gained that ability, and of course, when she does become fluent in heptapod B or whatever it is,
I think it's B.
She transitions over fully, but you get to see who she was prior to that, and the fact, and I don't know, I really enjoyed that aspect of seeing the two versions of her. So I have to give it a fairly strong 1, just by the full realization of a single character with two different consciousnesses
in such a short story. It's a really impressive thing to do. Yeah, I completely agree with the strong 1 there.
All right. You guys have convinced me. I'm going to come down on a 1, and I'll just say why for 3 different things. Everything you said. She has an arc. When she grows, learns, changes, in fact, gains a different viewpoint upon a fundamental thing of reality. She's an interesting character, I would say, more often than not, and she's competent at her given job, her assigned job. And so while you follow her, and maybe there's, at least personally to me, there might be some stumbling blocks, I think overall, I think you guys got me that she does deserve a 1 as a protagonist. So
it's really funny because we're talking about the time thing, and it's so funny. No, talking about this, I keep coming back to it because I knew I was giving her a 1.
You can't help it, can you?
No, I can't.
Much like her herself.
But I knew I was giving it a 1. It's kind of like going out to Halloween. It's I had this empty basket. I'm like, here you go. And it's just I wasn't able to visualize it. So I'm it's, I handed it off to you 3, and it was able to help me connect all the dots in my brain.
We filled your basket.
Yeah.
You filled my basket.
With
we drank your milkshake.
Knowledge nuggets, if you will.
Pure gold knowledge nuggets.
Uh-huh. All my nuggets are gold.
My basket brings all the podcasters in the yard.
For sure. Anyways, but I believe that is a 1 for Dr. Louise Banks.
Yeah, sounds that way.
Supporting character,
and it's
Scott.
to me for supporting. And this one is at the outset. I'm going to tell you guys, I'm leaning towards a 0, and here's why: they're basically one-dimensional. And the military guy, corporal, general, whatever the fuck his name is, doesn't even matter.
Corporal General.
He is the most corporal general caricature ever in the world. And the story even lampshades it. That's what the general would say. Because he was thinking about it this way. So he's never not that. And her love interest, Gary, is the physicist who's working with her on the project, on talking and figuring out the hepatodes in general, is fine, but he doesn't have much characterization beyond her love interest really throughout. And there's not really many other people that are actually named characters.
Oh man,
what?
Come on,
come on, man, what?
The heptapods themselves. We didn't mention them.
I'm getting to that.
All right, well.
If you let me finish, my friend.
I'm sorry.
So the human characters, but the thing, if you count the heptapods as characters, then they're extremely interesting, and of course they're big catalysts through much of the story. Even though they're sort of of course faceless aliens in a sense, in fact they have 7 eyes, whatever. The description of them is in there, but of course they're super important because they're the other equation to this entire setup. So maybe on that front, I'll give secondary a 1. But all the human, aside from Luis, all the human characters really I thought were one-dimensional or maybe 1.5 at best. And they serve their role, but they do nothing beyond that. They don't even grow,
they're plot devices.
Yeah, exactly. They're plot coupons even in some sense. But the hepatodes, I think may deserve or get enough credit for me to push this over to a 1 because they are in fact by far the most interesting side characters, so...
Again, I'm going to go into the movie for a second. Gary was a much more interesting character in the movie.
He had much more characterization in the film version, sure, but
I'm going to have to give credit to the heptapods, Raspberry and whatever.
Flapper.
Yeah, they were great. I want to meet one.
They even changed their names in the movie if we're going to do that real quick. But
but I actually have to give full credit here to the daughter because I know you get. Scott and Sivo, you were less impressed by the aspect, but I like how you're given It's the story of your life is the title of this.
Sure, so
it's not the story of Louise's life. It's the story of she's constantly narrating to this the daughter she lost throughout all this. Again, it's weird to me that she is more attached to the daughter than the fact that she translated an alien language, but whatever.
To each their own, sir.
I felt that like each, in a sense, small segment you had of her viewing the daughter's life throughout, and it was told non-linearly. You saw her at 25, you saw her at 16, you saw her at 3. All these aspects was actually, when he got over the saccharine element to it, it was actually an interesting character study of a person you'll never actually meet, like as a fully realized character.
Of a person who, despite the time of the telling of this, which seemingly is before the daughter is born, is already dead.
Yes,
which I think is a really fascinating aspect of this story. Despite the fact, like if I, and that's going to go into style for sure, but I think that the idea of the daughter, I don't know if I view the daughter as an actual character, because this is a dead person who we're seeing only through memories, who doesn't actually have any agency of her own. We're just seeing another person's idea of this person, right? So I don't know if I count her as a character in this.
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you on that.
I think that that as a stylistic element, she's awesome, despite the fact that I'm not the hugest fan of the story that involves her, in that I think it's kind of saccharine, and like it really just it tugs at your heartstrings, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do. You know, that's its point in the story. I think that the way that they do it is really cool, but I don't view her as a character. But I do view Raspberry and Flapper as characters, and I love them. I think that they have this whole weird, you kind of have this idea of their character arcs like throughout time, based on what you know of them and like what you know of Dr. Banks. In her short time figuring out this language, you get an idea of what they have always lived with, and their idea of always like they've had their entire character arc be their first dimension the entire time, which I think is really cool.
No, that's really well put.
There is no character arc for them, because they have always been exactly what they are, and they all of their growing throughout time and changing and all this stuff has always been a part of them, which is really fascinating to me. So just based on them, and they both definitely, despite the fact that they can't directly talk, even though they do directly talk, they can't speak any language that, they can't speak English, and we can't speak heptapod, right? They have their own, personalities.
Yes.
Which is really cool. And like they kind of put personalities into this very short story for these aliens that are almost unknowable. So based on the strength of those two, and I think that's basically it, I'm going to give supporting characters a 1. Everybody else is just there. They're parts of the story, but they're not that important. What's really important is Dr. Banks and the 2 aliens and her daughter, who is basically a memory from the future.
An idea, or an echo of the future, I guess. No, you're right. Like, I mean, I've been convinced all human characters, secondary, really are sort of by the wayside, but the heptapods, and I like your angle of taking her daughter. I remember her daughter's name, but the use of her is well done enough that I'm going to give it a solid, maybe soft 1, but still 1 to secondary at the end of the day. So.
That was the whole secondary character was part of the wondering whether Louise was proactive or reactive, and it was through our discussion, because I was going to give supporting a 1 anyway, because I'm usually loath to give plot devices. I always say, like, if you got a character who's a plot device, don't develop it as a character who uses a plot device. But here is a great example. You want to see a good example? No, I won't get into
No.
But
I don't.
Here's a really good example of developing a plot device into a character to help flesh out the protagonist. I mean, the daughter really serves a really great purpose because she does have a character and her story is told non-linearly, but the parts of her story that are fleshed out are through the progression of Louise's character. So it's kind of like they're kind of mirroring each other in a weird way.
They're complementary.
They're complementary. Raspberry and Flapper, I got more out of them, believe it or not, the second time I read it. I was really interested in their interaction. That really, to me, fleshed out more when I was reading it as an observer, knowing what the story was, as to knowing
all the angles of time.
Yeah, as opposed to wondering what their end game was. Instead of me playing the part as the reader of the military guy trying to figure out what these end game were of these creatures, I was able to go back into the story, and everything that the first time I read it was hindsight. I was actually able to really enjoy the second time, get the full flavor of who these two characters were. So yeah, I was going to give it a 1 anyway, but Raspberry and Flapper
stronger than before.
Definitely, their own characters, and I think they're great.
All right.
So 1's all around?
Yeah.
Seems like it.
Cool.
And Steve-O, to you with... Oh, wait. No, I'm wrong.
Don't skip.
No
skipsies.
No skipsies. It's to Ian with dialogue, which helps complement your themes.
Disjointed time.
So, I'm not going to talk about... Like Steve-O did with supporting characters, I'm not going to talk about human dialogue here. Although, some of it is fine with the interaction between Gary and Luis and whatever. But as a linguist and a metaphysician and all of that kind of things,
and all that jazz, in quotes,
yada yada yada.
I really enjoyed the depth that the author went to describe Raspberry and Flapper's language and the heptapod language, to the distinction between their vocal language and their written language, and how because they view time all at once, what their written language reflects their time. And if you want to consider mathematics as also a language, they view just by their inherent nature of viewing time differently, their mathematics developed differently in that they viewed iterations and complex calculus very fundamentally, but viewed algebra, which is very causal,
as a difficult concept.
And like that aspect. And yeah, it's not, I guess, traditional dialogue, but it is, in a way, the author put forth a lot of effort in developing a distinct language that would be realized by a creature that viewed it that way. So I have to give it a strong 1 for that.
It's very interesting that you say that, because I was definitely going to give this a 0 at first, and then I was like, wait a minute, this is a story about linguistics that I thought was pretty good, like linguistically.
You'd be remiss if you didn't.
So I went back and thought about it, because the on-page dialogue really isn't that great.
Nope.
The dialogue between humans really isn't that great, but the idea of having this dialogue with an alien race, and the idea of developing and learning this, multi-temporal or
based
all temporal language, and kind of
omnitemporal.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
I like it.
And sort of figuring out how to use that and how to speak with these other creatures that don't talk the same way as you. Not only...
Or think even.
Or think, yeah. Learning how to think like them. Not only is it clever and like a good style device, but it requires a lot of explaining and thinking about how dialogue actually happens. And for that reason, I think I have to give this a 1.
I'll say that to me, dialogue and style sort of like bleed over because of the very fact of the things you guys just said. Like it's sort of like inextricable from each other because of the nature of the story and because of the setup. So while yes, the dialogue between humans isn't all that interesting, like it's fine. And I was going to actually bring up a thing that you have done in the past, Steve, where because it's in first person, because basically every thought is Dr. Banks's monologue, you could maybe count that as dialogue. But even razoring that all away, I think that is the interesting part of the learning the heptad's language in both sectors, and especially the B language, if you will. And again, it bleeds over a bit, but the fact that she starts thinking in her own mindset in their language, like, is like a sort of very nice effect or nice description that it happens.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to give it credit on that front in dialogue specifically, and probably give it a 1.
I was definitely going to give it a 1. Because
were you?
I definitely was.
Did you see yourself giving it a 1 in the past?
I did. Only
sir.
because it was very hard, and this might have been why I almost jumped dialogue for style, because in a lot of ways, the second time I read this, I really kept going back and rereading certain things to get the flavor, to really understand how it was written.
Get that flavor.
But narratively in the story, knowing now that I had the whole time perspective, the fact when they had the logo,
now that he's a time master,
when they had the logograms, and they were designed so that no matter how you looked at it, you could see it. All of a sudden, kind of really like right at the beginning of her translating the heptapods, everything from then on made more. Going into it this time, it made a lot of sense. And when I saw that, I'm like, oh fuck yeah, this is definitely getting a 1 for the reasons you all pointed out. Because I thought it was such. I mean, but by the same way that they couldn't grasp algebra, the way that their language, their written language was constructed, I thought was just. I felt the story was, as Crichton would, a really well thought out.
It was very clever and well presented.
Yeah,
we'll say. Yeah, for sure. I agree. So that's why I'm also giving it a 1.
Yeah.
Dialogues.
Although I wasn't sure at first, but we all convinced ourselves.
Okay, Steve-O, would you like to talk about style?
Oh, style? Sure.
Sure. Is there a style to this?
Style was great. I thought that the style of this was really good. Regardless of how I felt about any specific stylistic elements, as far as like plot went or feel went, I thought that the idea of using these flash forwards that the main character can see and slowly revealing how that's possible and why we're using the future tense and all these, I thought that was really cool. I thought that Ted Chiang did a really good job of showing of making you be able to see what these heptapods looked like, how they wrote their language, how their language kind of came out of them, and
it was vividly described
type of stuff without having to go into too much over detailing everything and
extraneous expository shit
in a fairly short amount of time. I mean, this isn't by any means a super short story. It's like 40 pages long or something like that. But
30 and change or something. But still, yeah.
But it is not all that long, and you get a lot out of it in that short amount of time, I think. Especially stylistically, I think he did a really good job with it.
I pretty much agree generally, and like I said, it's sort of like in this case, the story specifically, style and dialogue seem to bleed over because of the nature of it. So yeah, it's almost like not quite Pulp Fiction or even like 12 Monkeys, but it jumps back and forth. So it's like a section of her doing her actual job when she's talking to Gary, and she's doing the decoding of the heptad's language and figuring it out, and then it's her flashing back or forward, even as the case may be, variously, to her life and her experiences with her daughter. So it's all cut up. I think it's paced very nicely. I'll say that for sure. So yeah, and I thought, Ted Chiang has like a nice, if not, I don't want to say hypnotic, but just a very nice flowing style to him. Or again, hate to use style in the question of style, but very nice angle that he uses that carries you along. It's sort of not effortless, but just I was never bored once ever throughout really reading it. And like I said, it was all cut up and you get like slices here and there. So yeah, I have to say it's goddamn solid and it kept me going along, and I think it's well integrated to all the other things that we said previously.
So I have one example to give quickly about that I think really shows the style and specifically on how she views time now. So when she goes out, basically when she's about to realize her future relationship with Gary, they go out to buy food at a
market,
and she's like walking along the aisles and she sees a salad bowl. And she's like, this salad bowl is going to fall on the head of my child at one point and hurt her. We're going to feel very worried. And she buys the salad bowl at that point.
Said salad bowl, yeah.
Because she knows that that's her
destiny.
Yeah. I knew you were going to say that word.
Like, perhaps like responsibility to the temporal like world.
Continuity, if you will.
Is to purchase this so that it will one day hurt her child. But she, like, it's natural.
Yeah.
Like, it's
exactly
her nature to
like
do
I said,
this.
it's almost like she's like not resigned, but like she's like I do
this.
It's
always her nature to do that. She just realizes it.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So
I think that those kind of like aspects of intertwining time, which is a very difficult thing to do on paper, really well. I think that this author demonstrates perhaps as close as I've read to seeing what
sort of conveying that,
having that kind of perspective would be like. And so I have to give him full credit for that. Perhaps there's been other authors who've done it better, but this is as close as I've gotten. So I have to give it a very strong one.
Fair enough. I hear you, and I largely agree, like I said. So
it's really interesting, the things, because I haven't seen the movie, the things that you can do visually, and the things that, like, with the written word that you can actually hold back, that they don't have to show who Gary is, so you don't really know that it ends up being her husband. But one thing I really loved when I was reading this, and I kept going back and reading it, was when she's her time with the heptapods mostly is told in the present. But from line to line, and even within the sentence, when she's talking about her daughter, his usage is both past and present. I mean,
it varies temperances.
Yeah, I mean, from a literary standpoint, the story is really well constructed, and I think that gives a lot of weight to talking about all these abstract subjects, because as we've talked about when we're discussing themes and we're talking characters and style, it's really hard to divorce yourself, because we are talking about a lot of different concepts. We're talking about a lot of abstract things.
A lot of ins, a lot of outs.
Yeah. And it's just like the style is probably, as much as I enjoy the story, I think style is the strongest one from me, because if the style was less, for lack of a better word,
wasn't as effective, we'll say.
As effective, the story would have not been effective at all.
I agree. I'll say one more thing. Like I said, again, this is another moment of bringing in the knowledge of the movie, but just that they actually, I believe, Ted Chiang did use midway through. It was the Fermat's paradox with how light refracts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was like the big.
That was an analogy. That was an important thing in the story. So I was somewhat, hopefully, like maybe expecting or maybe hoping for a logogram itself of the, like, you haven't seen it, Chris, but the visual effects of the aliens of Hepatod's language, it was very cool in the movie.
Yeah.
So I was maybe like, I was like, oh, flip this page to have like an example of what it looked like on, in print.
That would have been cool. But I like that they developed themselves for the movie,
But nevertheless, that's all. I just wanted to throw that in there. Otherwise, we can move on.
So we're all giving this one a 1?
Yeah. I am.
Excellent. And to me, it's recommendation. I did recommend this. As soon as I got done with it, I knew I really want to talk about this with you guys. All biases aside, you three would be three of the people I'd want to talk about it most with. I thoroughly enjoyed this story. I was really excited to come into this and reread it coming into this. And I have to say, it's one of those stories I highly recommend, and I highly recommend rereading. Hopefully, if you've gotten this far, you've turned it off and read it and watched it. But
if not spoilers, do that now.
But by this, oh yeah, well we do say in the introduction there's spoilers, so you're going into this
either way.
Spoilers.
Go on.
But I mean, I think even knowing the ending, even by just the nature of time and everything else, it's a really enjoyable read. I very strongly recommend it.
Well, as I said, I have not become a master of time yet, as you have apparently, Chris. But I wasn't. It was funny because going into this, I was wavering on whether or not to recommend it. Obviously, you already did, so you're sort of going to give it on. We always do. Whoever recommends, whoever's choice it was. But having talked it out,
I've not recommended things that
in few instances, that's perhaps that's happened. But by and large, it's sort of a natural thing. But having had the discussion we had and talked it out, I think that I would. And as I get drowned out by laughter, I think that I still would.
It's not you, dude.
I would recommend this story, at least more so than I, as I said, might have done so before this. So yeah, again, trying to divorce comparisons to the movie itself, I still think it is actually worth a read if you're a person who has any interest in speculative fiction, sci-fi-ish kind of stuff, linguistics, certainly specifically, anything like that. It's goddamn well done, pulled off overall, and definitely worth a check out. So.
This story was in ways written for me. I think that the author, viewing time throughout this said, this guy right over here will like this work. I'm going to write it for that. But
Sure.
And here's the thing: is it's one of the few instances where, because I really enjoyed Arrival as a movie, and I think that they complement each other. You can't say that one is better than the other because they both do aspects of it well. And
that's well said.
Having seen Arrival and knowing the ending of this, I enjoyed the ride thoroughly. And I like how they explain certain things in this that they didn't do in the movie, but I thought the movie did a fantastic
and maybe vice
job.
versa here. Yeah.
I think you can enjoy both. And I think that maybe in one sitting, in a sense, watch the movie and then read the story, you'll get a
fuller picture,
a bigger scope of this topic at hand. So this is me nerding out. I fully recommend this. And if anyone asks me, what do you do with linguistics? Here, read this or watch this movie. You'll understand.
That said, I like the movie better, but this short story is well done. And if nothing else, I think it provides a great vector for conversation.
Yep.
So if there's people that you think you might have good conversations with, read this and make them read it and talk about it with them, because it brings up a lot of interesting points that you can have a good convo with your friends about.
Absolutely.
If nothing else. And on top of that, it's just an enjoyable story to read. So I fully recommend it as well. So I'm gonna put the icing on the cake with the final one.
Alrighty. Very nice.
Very good. And Ian?
Who's got the final scores?
Okay, so Chris and I both give it a 9, and Scott and Steve both give it an 8.
Mm-hmm.
Give it an 8.5 overall.
I think that's pretty spot on.
I think it was actually higher than what we rated
the movie?
Arrival by 0.5.
It might have been. And the thing is, as I said, I was going into this probably giving it lower score than what I ended up giving it, but as we talked it out, and as we said, as we delve more into it, I think it does deserve that rating. So, yeah, that score that is. So,
yeah, I'm glad for the conversation because this is kind of what I hoped for. The three, if Beth hadn't recommended it to me, she would have been the fourth person I recommended it to. Mm-hmm. So I'm very happy about that. As far as Steve not recommending a story, I edited that story. I can't remember which one it was.
Harry Turtle Dove.
Check out Myth Manners.
Myth Manners.
No,
that way.
Or do.
Check out our review of it.
Yeah.
Don't check out.
Don't read the story.
Go through our MOTS Ado back catalog. Check out that story, and you'll see what we mean.
I edited it. I was
Anyways.
crying. Anyway, I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. I've been Chris Morgan with Scott Thurlow.
And I have to go hang out with my buddy Raspberry. See ya.
Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Bringing you the best discussion on linguists on the web.
And Stephen Hermosi.
And I have to go become a flapper.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.